I have been asked, out of all the projects that we are moving forward on, again, I said that there was probably about $50 million worth of public infrastructure and resiliency projects that we're engaged in presently. I've been asked to talk a little bit about microgrids. And I am no microgrid expert. I actually say that the job of mayor is you're doing something different every hour of every day, and that any type of professional expertise that I may have had back before I was mayor is long gone. You can't have an expertise in this job. I sometimes joke that the only expertise I have is an expertise of the local eateries, as you can see. But I am very grateful, very thankful to our Community Development Office and our Open Space Office, Steve Johnson and Jenna Lessons, for preparing this slideshow because it would be a very short discussion if they had not. The thing that I do know about microgrids, which I hope that you learned today, is that when the rest of the power goes off on the grid, the lights stay on if you have a microgrid. And when we have critical infrastructures that need to be powered on in order to respond to some of this devastation and destruction, it's one of those critical things when you've had the past experience with storms and devastation that we have had in Milford. So I think this is the clicker. On to the first slide. This slide is a NASA depiction of what the United States looks like from outer space at night back in 2012. And you can see how dependent we are on electricity, how dependent we are on energy. Certainly, it is a huge part of the health, welfare, and safety of what we do each and every day. The Blake family household is certainly dependent on electricity. I come home every night to see all the lights on, all the televisions operational. We certainly take our fair share of electricity, and when you don't have it, you realize how important it is to you and to the entire community, not just from a personal standpoint, but certainly from a community standpoint as well. This next slide depicts what the United States looked like from outer space on October 28th, 2012, right after Storm Sandy hit. You see that the Northeast has gone black. And that would not be the case if there were microgrids all around, because microgrids, the power would stay on, presumably, if the rest of the grid went down. We all know that climate change is real. Unless you have your head in the sand and you don't believe in science or scientists, you know that sea level is rising, that climate change is happening, and we have to respond. We have to change the way that we fundamentally do things. We have to decrease our carbon footprint and become more energy efficient. At the same time, we have to adapt, become more resilient, and try to make sure that our public infrastructure, our private infrastructure is harder and more resilient than ever before. This slide depicts the number of power outages after Storm Irene. You see that Milford is ground zero. We have more power outages than anyone else in the region. Over 9,000 different properties are without power. That same slide for Storm Sandy would balloon to over 13,000 homes without power. It was a tremendous week and a half to 2 weeks that we went through. Again, Storm Sandy hit October 28th, right when the weather starts changing from being okay to being cold. And when you have no electricity, when you have no power, people start getting cold. People need and require electricity and power in order to survive. And we had to do a lot of logistical gymnastics to make sure that everybody was safe and secure. Our neighborhoods were black. One of the things that I never thought in my wildest dreams and nightmares would be responsible for was canceling Halloween. Because the neighborhoods were black and it was not safe for kids to roll through the streets, we had to cancel Halloween, and actually we did it 2 years in a row. There was Storm Alfred and then followed by Storm Sandy. So those are some of the things that I didn't think I would be responsible for as mayor, and hopefully never again. This slide depicts the residential impact, the number of flood insurance claims from Storm Irene and from Storm Sandy. I was actually at a meeting today with FEMA this morning, and we account in Milford for about 20% of all flood insurance claims in the state of Connecticut since the flood insurance program went into being in the 1970s. So again, we are ground zero in Milford because we have such a low-lying area, because we have about 4,000 properties in the flood zone. This slide shows a portion of Milford shoreline. I want to talk a little bit about some of the resiliency efforts that we have made in order to strengthen our public infrastructure. Again, I mentioned that we had about $50 million worth of projects that have been recently completed or are underway right now. And let me see if I could find some of the specific ones. One of the projects actually that got completed within the last week was not a municipal sponsored project, but one that certainly has affected our town and our coast. The Department of Energy and Environmental Protection just finished up a training wall and placed a new outfall because the former one that they installed in the 1980s really had eroded an entire section of beach and compromised the homes that were directly in front of that area that got carved out. They spent a couple $1 million making sure that that new redesigned, re-engineered training wall was shorter and squatter and less likely to erode the section of beach. So we're pleased about that. Hopefully we're going to be able to nourish that beach like we have several other beaches in the city of Milford. Woodmont Beach, for example, after Storm Irene, we put $600,000 worth of beach renourishment in, only to have it work, have it protect the homes, but at the same time, after Storm Irene, Storm Sandy came, and we were in the same position. This time, the Army Corps came in and put $2.5 million into beach renourishment, a low hydraulic beach, which all the residents in that area are not happy with because low hydraulic means very coarse sand, really rock. It's a rocky beach from the nice plush sandy beach that it previously was. But again, our priorities are to protect the households. This is a photo in the background of our Parsons Government Center. It's really the hub of city government. Almost all of the municipal offices are located here. It houses our financial infrastructure, our communications infrastructure. If this building goes down, the city cannot respond. So it is absolutely critical that this building stay up in times of power outage. This building, along with the 4 surrounding buildings, are part of our microgrid system, our proposed microgrid system, which is supposed to start construction mid-December of this year. City Hall, a private senior residential living apartments, our middle school, and Milford Senior Center. One of the things that we're able to take advantage of with this microgrid, above and beyond protecting our critical infrastructures, is being able to support some of the most vulnerable in our society, those folks at the senior center as well as those folks in the senior living apartments. Both some of the priorities that we were striving for when we applied for the microgrid. here are the microgrid features. It has an islanding component so that when the storm hits, so that when the power goes down, so that when the rest of the grid is offline, these 5 buildings will be operational. These 5 buildings will have electricity so that city government can continue, so that the vulnerable in our society will be powered up. All of our communications lines will be open. Also, we've identified 3 of these 5 buildings as sheltering components. We had stood up both shelters after Storm Irene and Storm Sandy, as well as warming centers. Again, there were thousands of houses that were without power after both Storm Sandy and Storm Irene. Storm Irene was in August. Storm Sandy, when it was in October, when the weather started getting cold, people did utilize our shelters. Again, a big thank you to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection for investing in Milford $2.9 million towards the project. DEEP's contribution will pay for the design, the engineering, and the networking of the 5 buildings, the connectivity. The city is responsible for the generation component. We have partnered with a financier with a power purchase agreement to actually pay for the generators that will be installed. And another component of this project is that the 4 buildings will also have, or actually the 4 buildings will also have backup battery systems. Again, I mentioned that our communications equipment, our finance equipment, all of our network computer infrastructure is in the Parsons building and City Hall. We need to have that battery backup. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We know that climate change is real. We know that sea rise levels are increasing. We need to do things like become more energy efficient in all that we do. We need to reduce our carbon footprint, and at the same time, we need to be able to withstand what Mother Nature throws at us, not just in the next couple of years, but in the long term. We are always hoping for the best, but we at the same time have to prepare for the worst, and that's part of what the microgrid will provide us. This slide is one that I don't really understand. It's a calculation that's derived by the EPA. Our engineers placed in a whole bunch of the different schematics of our microgrid, and it came out with a final calculation of a 45% reduction in our carbon footprint at and around the microgrid that is to be installed. Lessons learned. One of the things that we did just recently, we took advantage of approximately $500,000 in UI incentives, and we retooled our Parsons government building, our City Hall, our middle school. We redid all of the lights so that we now have high-efficiency LEDs in those buildings. We put new boilers in City Hall. We redid the entire heating control system in the Parsons Government Center. The Parsons Government Center at one point back up until the early 1980s was a school, a high school that we decommissioned and repurposed as a government center. When they switched it over, they patched it back together, and it's not a very efficient building. It wasn't a very efficient building. During the winter months, it uses 36 gallons of fuel an hour, a tremendous drain on energy. And one of the things that we did in anticipation of this is to make sure that we got our city buildings more energy efficient than they had been. We initially wanted to have a PV, a photovoltaic component of this project. However, the state is still working on the virtual net metering. and the previous incentives, the previous credits that municipalities got for generating renewable energy had sunset. We're hoping that they're going to come back and we can add a photovoltaic component to this project. But one of the other things that we have done well is partnered with some of the other champions to this project, namely our friends at DEEP, our friends at UI. Again, we have a public-private partnership with the Senior Center Housing. We partnered well with them. Certainly our Public Works Department has been all in on this endeavor. So I see the sign that I'm supposed to be wrapping up. I think this is the last slide, and I'll just wrap up by saying that government can't do everything. It shouldn't be doing everything, but we absolutely have a responsibility in government to help those people recover from and prepare for those forces of nature that are outside of any individual's control. We have an absolute obligation to make sure that people are safe. We know that climate change is real. We know that sea level is on the rise. And if we don't prepare, if we just take our hand off the tiller and are not making our shoreline and our public infrastructure and our private infrastructure more resilient, we are going to be in trouble, because the next big one is going to come and we have to be prepared. So I appreciate the time. I do enjoy being in this area. I grew up coming to Portland, Connecticut, right across the river. My dad had a little marina, and this is my old stomping ground. So every time I come up to this section of Connecticut, it brings a smile to my face. But if you have any questions, as I started to say earlier, I am not the subject matter expert. I do see Veronica in the audience. If you have any questions about Milford's resiliency, about Milford's experience, however, over the past 4 years since Storm Irene, I'm happy to answer any of those.
We probably have time for one question, if there is a burning question for the mayor right now.
In connection with the microgrid, you mentioned that the source of the energy will be generators. So my question is, does your town have any experience with fuel cells? Or how good are they?
There are microgrids that are powered by fuel cells or have a fuel cell component. We investigated all avenues, and that wasn't right for us. For this particular project, we actually had done a lot of investigation for a fuel cell at our wastewater treatment plants. We have two. Those two plants together, we spend over $1 million in electricity. We were looking to take advantage of some of the state incentives that existed about 5 or 6 years ago that made it a no-brainer to implement a fuel cell. A lot of those state incentives around fuel cells vanished, so it wasn't financially, economically viable for us to pursue a fuel cell. We were very interested about 5, 6 years ago. I do know that some of the best fuel cells are made in the Danbury area of the state of Connecticut. The other part of it is the size of the fuel cells that we needed in order to power just didn't work either. But we have in the past looked at fuel cells. There was a time in Connecticut where it was a no-brainer to bring a fuel cell online. Hopefully, with some new state incentives, we may investigate that again.